Rev up your engines!
Today I'm going to tell you why not to waste your hard-earned money on expensive gasoline when your car doesn't need it. Now, I started out pumping gas at my father's corner Texaco gas station. And even back in those days, the oil companies, they were pushing their expensive, high-test premium gasoline. My father ran the station, wondered, how come they charge us so much more for the high-test than the regular? They actually had a congressional meeting where they asked the car companies, how come the high-test gas is so expensive compared to the regular, when they found out that it cost maybe a penny more back in those days to make the high-test than it did for the regular. Well, the oil companies came back with a simple answer. We have to get back our advertising, because in all their advertisements, they only advertise the high-test gasoline. Like in Shell's case, you see the ads are all the Shell V-Power, their most expensive gasoline. So they're saying, well, all our advertising is tied in with that, so we got to charge a bunch more to pay for the advertising. So of course they want you to buy the more expensive gas, even though your car doesn't need it. Take their recent advertising campaign for the Shell V-Power Nitro Plus high-test gasoline. They claim it has 7 times the minimum required cleaning agents in it, but of course, they don't tell you what exactly the agent is, how much is actually in there. Now, of course, they do spend a small fortune advertising this stuff. You'll see YouTubers out there that have sponsored videos by Shell, and they tout this kind of stuff. But hey, that's just paid advertising. Let's get into the real facts here. I've been to Shell Laboratories, and I asked them about the additives. They said, Scotty, we can't tell you. Those are trade secrets. Well, hey, we're buying the stuff. Why is it a secret? And they said stuff like, well, we don't want to get an additive war. Well, why not? I think additive wars would be great. If we had cars that ran cleaner and they put more in, maybe they'd make a little bit less profit. But hey, these oil companies are swimming in the money. And for the life of me, I can't understand why you buy a box of cereal. It's got every single ingredient that's in it, so you can compare. Are the cereal companies saying, oh, we don't want a cereal war? Well, I guess they're well open to cereal wars. But the oil companies, no, they're a little more tight-lipped about it. So when someone tells you it's got 7 times the cleaner, but they won't tell you how much that actually is, hey, take all this stuff with a grain of salt. BP calls their additives Invigorate. Invigorating, isn't it? Chevron calls it Techron. And Shell calls it Shell V-Power Nitro Plus. Had to add that plus there. The good ones, they contain the PEA. That's a nitrogen-based cleaner, which all those additives, the good additives that you put in your gas tank, they all contain PEA. You take something like Seafoam that I don't like, the last time I checked, it contains absolutely no PEA at all. It's a cleaner that was made, since it's called Seafoam, for old-fashioned outboard motor engines in the 50s. There were 2-stroke motors where you had to mix oil with the gas. Perfectly fine for that, but for 4-stroke modern engines, no, you don't use that kind of stuff. So from what I've read, all the major brands and their premium, they put in some amount of PEA, but they won't tell you how much. I find that amazing myself because I've been to the labs at Shell. Those things are complex. They have all kinds of technology, and they could certainly tell you exactly what's in that gasoline, but they're not going to. They're just going to try to convince you to put their high-test, most expensive gas in your car through advertising. So don't listen to their advertising. Hey, I've got a whole video out there on exactly about the different types of gasoline and when to use them, which have been copied by innumerable other YouTubers. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing. But basically, most cars these days are made to run perfectly normal on regular gasoline, the cheapest stuff there. The higher octane gas, the only difference between that and regular gas is it can take more pressure before it ignites. So if you have a high compression racing engine, or if you have a turbo or supercharger that pumps in more air, which in effect increases the compression, a lot of those, especially the old ones, will only run correctly on high octane gas or they'll knock from pre-ignition. But even that's just the case for the old ones. You take the new ones. I had a Ford Mustang with that 4-cylinder one that puts out 300 something horsepower. It told you you could use the premium and you get 300 something horsepower, and if you don't use regular, it'll run perfectly fine, but then you'll have 200 something horsepower instead. It won't have as much power, but it'll run perfectly fine. Ever since I was a young mechanic, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, there's been a battle between the car manufacturers and the oil companies. The car manufacturers say, you can make any kind of gasoline, so our cars will run perfectly fine. But then the oil companies would come up with their idea, you can make cars that'll run on any kind of gasoline that we make. So they're all always battling back and forth. But with modern technology, the car manufacturers basically have solved that problem entirely with computer technology. They make cars that can run on any kind of gasoline and work perfectly fine. If you take an extreme example, the flex fuel cars, they can run on any combination of pure gasoline and ethanol. The stuff you buy at the pump, 10 to 15% ethanol. All cars run on that. But if you ever see one of those E85 ethanol stations, that's 85% ethanol, the alcohol, and only 15% gasoline. You need a special car to run on that all the time, but the manufacturers have figured that out. In that case, they have special oxygen sensors on the exhaust, special fuel pumps that can take the extra alcohol, special fuel injectors that can take all that alcohol without being damaged, because alcohol can ruin a lot of fuel parts. I had somebody tow me a car. It had been at another shop for 3 weeks. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I kind of thought, let's test the gasoline. They did all kinds of electrical, mechanical tests, but they didn't say anything about testing the gasoline. This ethanol testing kit costs less than 10 bucks, doesn't cost anything. It can test the level of ethanol in your gasoline. And you might ask, why is there ethanol, commonly known as alcohol, in my gasoline? So here's the story behind it. When I was a young mechanic, they used leaded gas. That's the only gas you could buy was leaded gas. And they put lead into the gasoline as both a lubricant for the valves, the metal parts, and as an octane booster to raise the octane so the engines didn't knock when you were accelerating and knock, 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 knock. The lead would stop such pre-ignition, but of course, as we found out, maybe the Romans never knew, that might have led to their decline, lead is not good for you whether you drink it or breathe it in. And since it was in the car's gasoline, you were breathing fumes out. Lead is not good. So they took the lead out. Back in 1990, they passed a law that said you got to take all the lead out of gasoline by the year 1995. So there's no more leaded gas in the United States. But they had to replace the lead with something, so they replaced it with a chemical called MTBE. And this MTBE both oxygenated the fuel so it would burn cleaner and raised the octane level so the engines wouldn't knock when you accelerate, especially with higher compression engines. Now this additive worked perfectly fine, at least for the machines, but not so great for people, because it turned out that the MTBE was getting spilled into groundwater from underground tank leaks and stuff. So that was the end of that. They had to get rid of that and replace it with something else. And much to the pleasure of Midwest corn farmers, they decided to replace it with ethanol, alcohol that's made from corn, mainly in the United States. Ethanol actually burns very clean, and it raises the octane level of gasoline. It's got two major problems with it. Ethanol has less British thermal units, BTU, less energy than gasoline. So if you ran a car with 100% ethanol in it, you would get about 20% worse gas mileage than you would with the same amount of gasoline, because it has less energy. And two, in higher concentration, the ethanol can destroy rubber products in the car, really absorbs water a lot, so you can end up with too much water in your gas tank. So it's got its downsides too. But that said, the ethanol is in use in American gasoline. The most common use is 10% ethanol and 90% gasoline. Look at the pumps. A lot of times it'll say may contain 10% ethanol. Well, if it says may, that means that almost always that's what's in it. Now, such gasoline has additives in it so that little bit of ethanol doesn't damage anything. Now, let's say if you've got one of those flex fuel cars that'll run on all kinds of different fuels, and those you can use E85, which is 85% ethanol and 15% gasoline. But flex fuel cars that can use that have special fuel pumps, fuel lines, fuel injectors, sensors. They got all kinds of stuff so that they can run on any variety of ethanol gasoline mix. They'll work perfectly fine, but only in those flex fuel cars. If you have a normal car that isn't flex fuel, do not put the E85 in it, because if you have too much ethanol in your fuel in a normal car, it's not going to run right, it's going to absorb a lot of water. But really, how the heck are you going to know what's in your gas tank? Well, this little test kit comes in really handy. I had a car towed over here a few weeks ago. I did this test and found out that the vehicle had almost 30% ethanol in a car that could only run 10% max. I ended up draining the gas tank, changing the fuel filter, and then the car ran perfectly fine. And this was after somebody else had worked on the car for weeks and weeks, couldn't figure out what's wrong. Just get a sample of the gasoline, take the cap off, and I'm gonna use this little pump I got in AutoZone for less than 10 bucks. It just goes right in, and then just pump a sample out. As you can see here, you fill it up to water here, to this line. Here's some tap water. Not gasoline, tap water. We fill it to the little line there. There, now it's right at the line. There it is right on the water fill line. Now we fill it up to the gasoline fill line, which is the top line here. Then what do? Put the top on tight, shake it up. That mixes it all up. And it's going to tell us how much ethanol is in that gasoline. Now, as you can see, it's settling down. The line's coming down. We wait until it stops settling. You need patience. As you can see, it's starting to settle. I'd say, give it a good 10-15 minutes. Okay, as you can see, it's settled out now. And it's between 15 and 20. I'd say it looks like about 17% ethanol is in it. So that's way too much ethanol. It's supposed to be a maximum of 10%. Now, like I said, if you had a flex fuel car, that can run on E85. That's 85% ethanol. And that would run perfectly fine on this. Because the flex fuel cars can run on any amount of ethanol from 0% to 85% ethanol. The sensors and the computers and the fuel pump, they can handle that, and they tell the computer how much ethanol is in the fuel. They have ways of testing it with their sensors so that it can set up the car to run. If it's 20%, it'll run on that. If it's 40%, it'll run on that. But in a normal modern car that isn't flex fuel, you do not want more than 10% ethanol in your fuel. And in this case, it was about 17%, which is bad. And in the case of the vehicle I fixed a few weeks ago, the ethanol content was almost 30%. I had to drain the gas tank, change the fuel filter, and then I filled it up with super with some Shell V-Power gas, and then drove it around for a day or two, and it went totally back to normal. And the only way I would have ever figured that out was with this simple little test kit. That's modern technology for you. Back in the day when I was a kid, guys used to race the alcohol dragsters all the time, and they had to put special carburetors on because the alcohol would ruin the carburetors over time. But a modern flex fuel vehicle, it can run on all kinds of combinations. The computers on your car with the sensors can figure out exactly what's in it and make the car run perfect by comparing the data it gets in the exhaust and changing the timing and the fuel injection pulsing. So they can run on just about anything. Don't listen to any of those advertising, especially sponsored YouTube videos that are sponsored by the oil companies that talk about their great premium fuel that everyone should use. Don't waste your money on that stuff. Unless you're driving a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and you already wasted tons of money on that, so you threw hundreds of thousands out on those things. I realized the truth that in most places, there's one place that refines the gasoline, and everyone else buys it from them and then puts their own dye in or puts their own additives in. The basic gasoline from all the companies in one area pretty much come from the same place. If your car runs fine on regular gas, doesn't ping, just stick to it. All cars are made these days to run on that stuff except for exotic cars. And don't even get me talking about the mid-grade gasoline. There's no reason for that at all. Even my father back in the days, the 1960s, said, you know, we got the regular, we got the high test, but what is this plus stuff in the middle? What's even the point of that? Even he wondered back in the day. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.